In the unforgiving vastness of the American frontier, where settlements clung to existence by the thinnest of threads, life was a constant battle against the elements. The year was 1878, and a small community, nestled deep within the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies, prepared for another brutal winter. Here, survival was dictated by resilience and the wisdom passed down through generations. Wisdom that dictated sturdy log cabins were the only defense against the biting cold. But amidst this staunch tradition, a quiet newcomer began to build a home unlike any other. His methods defied logic. His materials seemed absurd. He was a man named Elias Thorne, and his peculiar shelter, covered in layers of dried hay and straw, became the subject of whispers, then open mockery. "A hay house," they scoffed. "It will be nothing more than a frozen tomb." They called him a fool, a simpleton, a man utterly out of touch with the harsh realities of their world. Yet Elias remained silent, his gaze fixed on the darkening skies. He knew what was coming, and soon the relentless grip of winter, with its icy winds and heavy snows, would descend upon their valley, delivering its ultimate judgment. It would decide once and for all who truly understood the secrets of survival. De qual cidade você está assistindo esse vídeo? Se inscreva no canal, deixe seu like e compartilhe essa história com alguém que também gosta de histórias reais, de superação e sabedoria esquecida. The year 1878 found Elias Thorne, a quiet figure among the bustling, rough-hewn settlement of Oakhaven. He was a man of few words, his gaze often distant, fixed on the horizon as if searching for something others couldn't see. Elias had arrived in Oakhaven in early spring, a solitary wagon his only possession, carrying little more than the clothes on his back and the calloused hands of a laborer. He wasn't from these parts. His accent carried the faint lilt of a distant land, a land where winters were said to bite with a ferocity unknown even in the mountains. This made him an outsider, a stranger in a community built on shared history and kinship. The people of Oakhaven were hardy folk, proud of their self-sufficiency. They built their homes with sturdy pine and oak, massive logs stacked high, chinked with mud and moss against the relentless cold. This was the proven way, the only way, they believed, to withstand the blizzards that routinely buried their valley under feet of snow. When Elias began to clear his small plot of land on the western edge of the settlement, a place where the wind often howled first, folks watched with a mixture of curiosity and mild suspicion. He didn't immediately fell the largest trees for his cabin. Instead, he spent days meticulously clearing smaller saplings and brush, preparing a wider foundation than was typical. Days later, while other men were hauling logs twice his size, Elias was seen in the meadows, not with a scythe for harvesting crops, but for cutting vast quantities of dried hay and straw. He piled it high, an immense golden mountain that seemed out of place beside the burgeoning skeletons of log cabins. Neighbors, accustomed to seeing hay gathered only for livestock, began to whisper, "Is he planning to feed a whole herd of phantom cattle?" Old Man Hemlock grumbled, spitting tobacco juice onto the dusty ground. Young Thomas, always eager for a laugh, joked that perhaps Elias intended to sleep in the hay rather than on a proper bed. Elias, true to his nature, offered no explanations. He simply continued his work, his movements slow, deliberate, and utterly focused. He built a simple, rectangular frame for his house, nothing grand, perhaps a bit smaller than average. But then came the peculiar part. He started constructing a double wall. Instead of a single layer of logs, he built an inner frame and an outer frame, creating a hollow space between them. This was unheard of. It required more wood, more effort, and seemed utterly redundant to the seasoned builders of Oakhaven. "What's the meaning of this, Elias?" asked Jedediah, a burly settler who had built his own cabin with his bare hands and prided himself on efficiency. "You're wasting good timber, man. One wall is enough if it's thick. Elias merely shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and continued to nail planks to his inner frame. He didn't argue, didn't try to explain. His silence only deepened the community's bewilderment. Then the true absurdity began. Elias started packing the vast quantities of hay and straw he had gathered into the void between his double walls. Handful by careful handful, he stuffed the dry plant matter into every crevice, every gap, until the space was densely packed. The golden hay began to protrude from the gaps, giving his half-built house a shaggy, unkempt appearance. It looked less like a home and more like an enormous, poorly constructed haystack. The whispers turned into open jests. Children, mimicking their parents, pointed and giggled, calling it Elias's hay house. The women shook their heads, pitying the poor man who seemed to have lost his senses. The men, especially those who had prided themselves on their strong, conventional cabins, felt a growing sense of disdain. "It'll be a fire trap in summer and a frozen shed in winter," declared Silas, the most respected carpenter in the settlement, his voice dripping with certainty. "What good is hay against a blizzard? It's for feeding cattle, not for keeping a man warm." Elias heard it all. He heard the laughter, the scorn, the pity, but his face remained impassive. He continued to work from dawn till dusk, his hands growing raw, his back aching, driven by a conviction that no amount of ridicule could shake. He was investing not just his meager savings into this strange endeavor, but his very future, his reputation, and his chance at a peaceful life in Oakhaven. Every strand of hay packed, every plank nailed, was a silent bet against the collective wisdom of the entire settlement. He was an outsider, and now he was building an outsider's home, a monument to what everyone else called folly. The autumn winds had begun to blow, carrying the first icy promise of the coming season, and still Elias worked, oblivious to the growing storm of public opinion, his only focus the layers of insulation he was meticulously adding to his peculiar shelter. He knew, deep down, a simple truth about warmth, a truth he had seen in the way a small bird fluffed its feathers against the cold, or how a thick blanket held the heat of a body. He was betting his life on that simple principle, even if no one else understood it. As the weeks bled into late autumn, Elias Thorne's hay-covered dwelling became the talk of Oakhaven. It wasn't just its peculiar appearance, but the sheer effort he poured into it, an effort that seemed misguided to everyone else. He was a man possessed, working with a quiet intensity that bordered on obsession. His hands, already rough from labor, became even more gnarled, his face often smudged with dirt and bits of straw. He spent what little money he had on extra timber for the double walls, on nails, and on a solid, if plain, door and windows. Every penny was an investment in his unconventional vision. The ridicule deepened. Children would sometimes throw small pebbles at his hay house when he wasn't looking, daring each other to touch the strange, soft walls. Adults would make pointed comments within earshot, shaking their heads with a mix of pity and exasperation. "He'll freeze solid in that contraption," they'd say, "or it'll catch fire the first time a stray ember lands on it." The community, tight-knit and reliant on shared knowledge, saw his actions as a direct challenge to their proven ways, an affront to generations of mountain wisdom. Elias, however, remained unfazed. His mind was not on the scorn, but on a simple yet powerful principle he understood deeply, the nature of insulation. He didn't have fancy scientific terms, no academic degrees or complex equations, but he knew, from observation and a lifetime of subtle understanding, how heat behaved. He knew that warmth wasn't just about having a fire, it was about keeping that warmth from escaping. Think of a warm blanket on a cold night. The blanket itself doesn't generate heat, does it? No, it traps the heat your body already produces. It holds onto that warmth, preventing it from dissipating into the cold air around you. The secret isn't in the material of the blanket itself, but in the tiny air pockets trapped within its fibers. These air pockets are poor conductors of heat. They don't let heat move through them easily. This simple truth, this basic understanding of how trapped air resists the flow of warmth, was the foundation of Elias's entire project. Hay, he reasoned, was nothing more than countless tiny stalks, each creating microscopic air pockets when packed together. It was essentially a natural, inexpensive form of insulation. A thick layer of hay, tightly packed, would create a substantial barrier against the cold, much like a very thick, very efficient blanket wrapped around his home. The double walls he had constructed weren't just for structural support. They were a deliberate cavity, a chamber designed to hold this thermal barrier. He spent weeks meticulously filling every inch of the space between his inner and outer walls with hay. He didn't just toss it in, he pushed it down, compacted it, ensuring there were no large gaps or voids where cold air could easily penetrate. He packed it so densely that the walls felt firm to the touch, almost solid. He then covered the exterior with a thin layer of rough-hewn planks, not for structural integrity, but to protect the hay from the elements, rain, snow, and potential sparks. It was a crude but effective outer skin. His sacrifice was immense. Every waking hour, every ounce of his energy went into this construction. He ate simple, meager meals, often just dried meat and hardtack, saving every penny for materials. He had no time for hunting or fishing, no time for socializing. His only companion was the relentless rhythm of his work. His reputation, already fragile as an outsider, was now in tatters. He was seen as a peculiar, perhaps even dangerous eccentric. The risk was not just financial, but deeply personal. If his hay house failed, he would be not only homeless in the face of winter, but utterly disgraced, forced to leave Oakhaven with nothing but the bitter taste of public humiliation. As the first snow flurries began to dance in the air, a chilling precursor to the winter proper, Elias finally finished his dwelling. It stood apart from the sturdy log cabins, a strange, unassuming structure with its slightly rounded edges and the subtle golden hue of the hay peeking through the gaps in the outer planks. It didn't look strong, not in the way a log cabin did. It looked soft, vulnerable, almost like a temporary shelter. One evening, as the temperature plummeted and a biting wind swept through the valley, Silas, the respected carpenter, walked past Elias's finished home. He paused, a sneer twisting his lips. He saw the smoke curling lazily from the small metal chimney Elias had installed, a sign that the man was actually living in his folly. Silas shook his head, a mixture of contempt and a strange, almost morbid curiosity in his eyes. "He'll learn," Silas muttered to himself. "He'll learn what real cold is like soon enough." The sky grew heavy, a bruised purple-grey that promised a deep freeze. The air became still, pregnant with the unspoken threat of the coming storm. The last few leaves clung desperately to the bare branches of the aspens, rustling like dry bones. Elias, inside his strange hay-filled sanctuary, lit his small fire, feeling the first true test of his theory approaching. He knew the whispers outside, the certainty of his neighbors that he had made a grave mistake. But he also knew the quiet truth of trapped air, the simple physics that he hoped would prove them all wrong. The stage was set, the winter was coming, and it would be the ultimate arbiter of wisdom and folly. The sky, which had been a menacing bruise for days, finally broke. On a Tuesday night, just as the last sliver of sun dipped behind the western peaks, the first heavy flakes began to fall. Not the gentle, exploratory flurries of early winter, but a dense, swirling curtain of snow that immediately began to blanket Oakhaven. By morning, the world was transformed into a landscape of pristine white, silent and still, save for the moan of the wind. This was the beginning of what would become known as the Great Freeze of '78. The initial snowfall was just a prelude. For the next 3 days, the storm raged relentlessly. Visibility dropped to mere feet, the wind howled like a banshee, and the temperature plummeted to unprecedented lows. Every settler in Oakhaven hunkered down, tending their fires, checking their dwindling wood piles, and praying for the blizzard to break. The cold was a physical presence, seeping through cracks, chilling bones, making even the sturdiest log cabins feel inadequate. Inside his peculiar dwelling, Elias Thorne experienced a different reality. He had lit his small, cast-iron stove as the storm began, feeding it modest amounts of firewood. The hay, packed tightly between his double walls, immediately began to do its work. The air inside his home was still, calm, and surprisingly comfortable. He could feel the difference almost immediately. While the wind shrieked outside, rattling the small window panes, inside there was a profound sense of quiet. The dense layers of hay not only trapped heat, but also absorbed sound, muffling the storm's fury to a distant hum. He conducted a simple experiment. He placed a bucket of water near a window and another near the center of his small room. Days later, while others reported water freezing solid inside their homes, even near their fireplaces, Elias's water buckets remained unfrozen. The air in his home, though not sweltering, was consistently above freezing, a stark contrast to the biting cold that permeated every other structure in the settlement. Days later, the storm finally abated, leaving behind a world buried under 6 feet of snow. The temperature, however, remained brutally low, hovering well below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. The real test of Oakhaven's resilience had just begun. The community, accustomed to harsh winters, quickly discovered that this one was different. The cold was deeper, more persistent. The first signs of trouble emerged from the traditional log cabins. Despite roaring fires, many settlers found their homes difficult to keep warm. The massive logs, while strong, were not the best insulators. The small gaps between them, even when chinked, allowed precious heat to seep out and the bitter cold to creep in. Firewood, meticulously gathered throughout the autumn, began to dwindle at an alarming rate. Families were forced to huddle closer to their hearths, their breath visible in the air just a few feet away. Old Man Hemlock, whose cabin was one of the oldest and seemingly sturdiest, was among the first to face serious problems. His aging structure, with its worn chinking, simply couldn't hold the heat. His wife, frail and susceptible to the cold, began to cough incessantly. Their woodpile, usually sufficient for the entire winter, was half gone in just 2 weeks. Fear began to gnaw at him. Meanwhile, Elias Thorne, though living on the edge of the settlement, was unburdened by these anxieties. He used far less firewood than his neighbors. His small stove, stoked only a few times a day, was enough to maintain a comfortable temperature. He could sit by his window, a simple blanket over his lap, and read by the faint light, feeling the warmth radiating from his walls. He wasn't just surviving. He was living with a degree of comfort unknown to anyone else in Oakhaven. The turning point came when Jedediah, one of the most respected hunters and trappers, found his supply of firewood dangerously low. He had miscalculated, expecting a typical winter. Now, with the snow too deep and the cold too severe for effective foraging, he was desperate. He bundled up and ventured out, trudging through the waist-deep snow, hoping to trade for wood. As he passed Elias's hay-covered shelter, he noticed something peculiar. No plumes of thick smoke belched from Elias's chimney, only a thin, almost invisible wisp. This meant Elias wasn't burning nearly as much wood as Jedediah was. Jedediah, shivering despite his heavy furs, felt a pang of disbelief. How could a man in that ridiculous hay house be using less wood than him in his sturdy log cabin? It defied everything he knew. He paused, stamping his feet to ward off the cold, and watched. He saw Elias through the small window, moving about his home without the frantic urgency that had gripped the rest of Oakhaven. He seemed warm. The cold was becoming a real threat. Children were falling ill with chills. The elderly were suffering from frostbite in their own homes, and the communal fear of running out of wood was palpable. The traditional solutions, more fire, more blankets, more layers of clothing, were proving insufficient against the relentless, penetrating cold. The resilience of the community was being tested to its limits, and for the first time, a seed of doubt began to sprout in the minds of the Oakhaven settlers. Perhaps, just perhaps, Elias Thorne's folly wasn't so foolish after all. The true extent of the winter's devastation was yet to be revealed, but the signs were clear. Oakhaven was in trouble, and Elias was not. As the relentless winter tightened its grip, the initial disbelief in Oakhaven slowly gave way to a chilling reality. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was lethal. The community's proud, sturdy log cabins, once symbols of strength and security, were proving vulnerable. The traditional methods passed down through generations were failing against the Great Freeze of '78. The first serious casualty was Old Man Hemlock's wife. Her persistent cough worsened, her body weakened by the constant, penetrating cold that even their largest fire couldn't fully banish. One bitter morning, she simply didn't wake up. Her death sent a ripple of fear through the settlement. It was a stark reminder of winter's unforgiving nature, and it highlighted the grim truth. Their homes were not keeping them safe enough. Firewood, once abundant, became a precious commodity. Families rationed their supply, burning only enough to prevent complete freezing, but never enough for true comfort. The days were spent huddled, shivering, wrapped in every available blanket. Nights were worse, punctuated by the creaking of timber and the relentless moan of the wind seeping through the walls. The air inside many homes was often just a few degrees above freezing, a stark, miserable existence. Meanwhile, a strange quiet enveloped Elias Thorne's hay-covered shelter. No frantic chopping of wood, no thick plumes of smoke. Just a thin, steady wisp from his chimney, indicating a modest, controlled burn. The contrast was becoming too stark to ignore. Jedediah, whose woodpile was now dangerously low, swallowed his pride. He knew he had to do something, or his own family would soon face the same fate as the Hemlocks. One frigid afternoon, he bundled himself in his thickest furs and trudged through the deep snow towards Elias's home. His boots crunched loudly in the pristine silence, each step a testament to his desperation. He knocked on Elias's simple, sturdy door. After a moment, the door opened a crack. Jedediah was hit by a wave of warm, still air. Not hot, not stifling, but genuinely warm, like stepping into a different season. Elias, dressed in simple indoor clothes, stood there, his face calm, almost serene. He didn't look like a man battling a historic winter. "Elias," Jedediah began, his voice rough with cold and a tremor of embarrassment. "My family. We're running out of wood. The cold. It's too much." He gestured vaguely back towards the settlement. How are you doing it? How are you staying warm in this place?" His eyes scanned the interior, taking in the small, tidy room, the absence of roaring flames, the simple stove radiating a gentle heat. Elias, without a word, stepped aside and motioned for Jedediah to enter. Jedediah hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The warmth was immediate and enveloping. He felt his muscles relax, his fingers and toes begin to thaw. He pulled off his thick gloves, marveling at the feeling. The air was dry and comfortable, a stark contrast to the damp, biting chill he had endured for weeks. "It's the hay," Elias finally said, his voice soft, almost a whisper, as if sharing a secret. "It traps the air, keeps the warmth in." He pointed to the thick walls. "A blanket for the house." Jedediah walked over to a wall and hesitantly placed his hand on it. It wasn't cold. It felt surprisingly neutral, almost warm to his freezing touch. He then looked at Elias's woodpile, a surprisingly small stack tucked neatly beside the stove. It was larger than Jedediah's dwindling supply, but nowhere near what he would expect for a house that felt this warm. "How much wood do you burn a day?" Jedediah asked, his voice still low, almost reverent. "Perhaps 2 small logs in the morning, 2 more in the evening," Elias replied, gesturing to logs no thicker than Jedediah's forearm. sometimes less if the sun is strong. Jedediah's mind reeled. He was burning 10 times that much, and his family was still freezing. He had seen the proof with his own senses, the warmth, the quiet, the minimal wood consumption. The numbers, simple as they were, spoke volumes. Elias was using perhaps a fifth of the wood, yet achieving 10 times the comfort. Word of Jedediah's visit and the astonishing warmth inside Elias's hay house spread through Oakhaven like wildfire, faster even than the blizzard had raged. Skepticism battled with desperation. Other settlers, driven by the same fear and curiosity, began to make the difficult trek to Elias's home. Silas, the carpenter who had openly scoffed, was one of them. He arrived, stiff-backed and grim-faced, refusing to admit his curiosity, but his shivering body betrayed him. When Silas stepped inside, the transformation on his face was profound. The sneer dissolved into a look of sheer astonishment. He walked around, touching the walls, feeling the air, examining the small stove. He saw the minimal woodpile. He saw the comfort. "Elias," Silas finally said, his voice barely audible, stripped of its usual bravado, I was wrong. We were all wrong." He paused, a deep sigh escaping his lips. This is truly remarkable." It was a short admission, but for Silas, a man of immense pride, it was a profound confession. It was the crack in the dam, the first official acknowledgement that the outsider had, in fact, been right. The truth was laid bare, not by arguments or boasts, but by the undeniable sensory evidence of warmth, comfort, and survival. The hay, the absurd, ridiculed hay, had proven to be a superior defense against the most brutal winter Oakhaven had ever known. The simple principle of trapped air, understood by one quiet outsider, had triumphed over generations of entrenched tradition. The community, facing a life-or-death struggle, was now ready to listen. The admission from Silas, the respected carpenter, was the turning point. It wasn't just Jedediah's testimony anymore. It was the word of the most pragmatic and experienced builder in Oakhaven. The community, desperate and facing continued hardship, began to view Elias Thorne not as a fool, but as a quiet prophet of survival. The visits to his hay-covered shelter became more frequent, no longer driven by morbid curiosity, but by genuine inquiry. Settlers came, one by one, with questions. "How thick should the walls be, Elias? What kind of hay works best? Can we add this to our existing cabins?" Elias, true to his nature, didn't gloat or lecture. He simply explained, patiently and clearly, the principles of insulation. He showed them how to pack the hay tightly, how to create the double walls, how to protect the hay from moisture. He spoke of trapped air, of creating a barrier that didn't let the warmth escape or the cold intrude. He even helped some of the younger men, guiding their hands as they experimented with adding hay insulation to their own homes. The immediate impact was profound. Those who could began to improvise. They couldn't build entirely new double-walled structures in the middle of winter, but they started adding layers of hay to the outside of their existing cabins, covering it with whatever spare planks or tarpaulins they could find. Others packed hay into their attics and under their floors. The effect, while not as dramatic as Elias's fully insulated home, was still significant. They noticed an immediate reduction in drafts and a tangible improvement in indoor temperatures. Their wood consumption, while still higher than Elias's, began to decrease. As the winter slowly receded, giving way to a hesitant spring, the lessons learned from Elias Thorne became embedded in Oakhaven's collective wisdom. The next building season saw a remarkable shift. New cabins were no longer built with single, thick log walls. Instead, many incorporated a version of Elias's double-wall design, filling the cavity with hay, straw, or even dried leaves. The technique spread beyond Oakhaven, carried by traders and travelers who heard the astonishing stories of the hay houses that had survived the Great Freeze of '78 with comfort and minimal fuel. Elias Thorne himself remained largely unchanged. He continued his quiet life, his home a testament to his foresight. He never sought praise or recognition, content in the knowledge that his simple understanding of physics had saved lives and transformed his community. He was no longer an outsider, he was a respected, if still somewhat enigmatic member of Oakhaven. His peculiar hay house, once a symbol of ridicule, became a symbol of ingenuity and resilience. The story of Elias Thorne and his hay-covered shelter is a powerful reminder that true wisdom often hides in plain sight, disguised as simplicity or even folly. It teaches us that the most effective solutions are sometimes found not in complex technologies or established traditions, but in a deeper understanding of fundamental principles. Elias didn't invent anything new. He simply observed the world around him, understood how heat and cold interacted, and applied that knowledge in a practical, accessible way. His story reflects a universal truth, that nature, in its elegant simplicity, often holds the answers to our most pressing challenges. It shows us the quiet strength of conviction, the power of an individual to see beyond conventional wisdom, and the enduring human capacity for adaptation and innovation. Elias Thorne's triumph wasn't about heroics or grand gestures. It was about the humble, undeniable reality of a warm home in a freezing world, a testament to the simple, profound power of trapped air. It was a victory not of man over nature, but of man understanding nature and bending its laws to his will, one layer of hay at a time. And in the quiet warmth of his simple home, he found not just comfort, but a lasting legacy.